So with that, I am going to share a presentation about kind of what it feels like to implement a project from a city perspective. In San Jose, California, we implemented Better Bikeways San Jose in about a year's worth of time, and that's really fast. Maybe not fast enough for everyone, but that's not normally the pace that a city works on. So what was it like us doing it? How did we get the message across about why we're doing this project? And then a little bit of the design details, including what may not be working so well and what we still have left to do. Context of San Jose, this is right over the hill from here, but this is kind of at the south end of the San Francisco Bay Area. It's a large city that in many ways a lot of it developed after 1950. We have a downtown area that's shown in this photo that is also centered on that map that I'm showing. And when we started talking about bicycling in the downtown part of San Jose, we knew that one of the biggest challenges to bicycling were barriers. So shown in the red lines are the freeway ring that kind of loops around the downtown. And also there are the blue lines, which are the creeks, and a lot of times there aren't a lot of ways to cross the creeks. So we started with the idea of how are we going to overcome some of these barriers for people to ride their bikes. And then those stars on that map reflect some of the really regional destinations that we knew were coming in and were best accessed by bicycle. The downtown train station, the public university, the downtown office core, and a future BART station that will be opening sometime soon. And so that is what we started with. And actually within this core part of the downtown, we also knew we had a lot of opportunities. We saw that the housing is actually a bit denser within that freeway ring. There's a grid of streets. There are some streets that are already being used by bicyclists. What can we do quickly to make an improvement on it? The history of the city was something that we wanted to make sure we put this in that context. So San Jose actually has history of being multimodal with that older street grid, having the downtown train station. This is a photo of people riding bicycles over 100 years ago in San Jose. It's a city that through all these new transportation investments is returning back to being multimodal again. There's a map of all the train lines that are planned to come in and all joined together at one downtown train station. This city kind of emptied out in the 1950s, 60s, 70s. This is actually one of the streets that we will be showing later. It was wide open. It had a lot of parking lots in the downtown. So that is, again, part of San Jose's history. But if you look around downtown today, you see more of the bottom map, which is a lot more new buildings that are under construction or being proposed. If we know the city's growing up, we can't do it all getting around in a car. And there's also a bit of a cultural change. For years, what's prized the most in San Jose is really having a great backyard. It's a really good place to hang out with your friends, and that is where people viewed, a good place to be social and see your family or your friends. But more and more people are embracing public life instead, and the place to hang out is the downtown area. Maybe something that Santa Cruz knows well. So we had this phrase, better bikeways. What is a better bikeway, though? We found that in reviewing with this organization called NACTO, it kind of led us to a few different flavors of things that we consider to be comfortable for people of all ages and abilities, or more ages and abilities. But where can you ride with your parents and your kids is kind of something to think about. If you can't ride there with those groups, is it really a comfortable bikeway that's going to attract a lot more new people to biking? And we found that the two main flavors that work well in San Jose are either on some of our streets doing a protected bike lane, and on some other streets, like our neighborhood streets, just making sure they're as calm as possible. Maybe it doesn't need a protected bike lane because there are so few cars, and there's reasons why it's not a very good street to drive on. And the reason we're doing that is there's this dichotomy of different types of bicyclists. There's everyone from your strong and fearless, your enthusiastic bicyclists. Those are actually people you probably see today riding a bike. But there's a big missing chunk of the population who's interested in it, who might even ride when they visit a trail or visit another city, but they're not doing it yet in our city. There's also lots of different purposes for bicycling besides the person pictured that's riding recreationally, or maybe even besides a commuter. Somebody could actually be riding using a bike share bike, carrying cargo, and kids riding. And so those are all trip purposes that are kind of new, and I've found that kind of getting to the subject of this conference, there are people making trips who are almost invisible to the general public. So I can stand on the side of a street and someone will tell me that they haven't seen anyone biking past them, and there have been 5 people who rode past who have maybe they have a sort of a department store bike and some shopping bags, or they're wearing a suit and they were riding bike share. Those are people who people don't see them as bicyclists because they're not wearing like a high-vis vest or something like that. So we're really used to people thinking that our projects are just for the commuter type, when our projects really are for people who are just getting from point A to point B. This is the 5 boxes on the top there reflect our city plans. We've heard a lot this morning about how our city's policy goals are what is driving us to act as staff members. There's kind of a planning trope that talk about plans that sit on the shelf. And I always like to make a joke that these 5 plans do sit on the shelf, but it's a shelf that's right next to my desk, so I can grab them and look at them. But we really are driven by these 5 plans that all mention explicitly that the downtown needs a protected bikeway network or an all ages and abilities bikeway network. And these 2 graphs come from our general plan. It's a city that we have a lot of population growth planned for, and yet a huge drop in single occupancy motor vehicles, a huge increase in biking, walking, and transit. How are we going to do that? It's getting that 60% interested but currently concerned. At the same time that our planning kind of all aligned for building a bikeway network, we also had a lot of political alignment and community support for this. The way that lined up is that on the left it shows political leaders, people that everyone would recognize in the community, coming out and saying that they support the project. But at the same time, people were kind of voting with their feet. So we had the electric scooters show up in our city, and when we had public meetings about our bikeway network, most folks would say, oh, yeah, I don't care about that. Can you tell me what you're going to do about the scooters? And then when we had meetings about the scooters, people would say, well, can you make somewhere good for them to ride because they're on the sidewalk right now? And so they essentially, the 2 subjects are more interrelated than you would think, and we had an answer for people, and within 6 months of the scooters arriving on our streets, we had protected bike lanes for them to ride in. So, and the users of the scooters go right back to that graph of who is interested and concerned. We see more people wearing everyday clothing using them, and actually more women riding on the electric scooters than do on the bike share bikes. So this is a bit more approachable. Maybe it's something to do with the seat or having to ride a bicycle. So they are popular in our downtown, and as a city we see them being a lot like bicyclists. Protected bike lanes a good place for them to ride, and the users of them, every city gets complaints about the users of them, but these are people who are actually learning what it feels like to be a vulnerable user, and over time we see them getting into our protected bike lanes and actually starting to learn all the behaviors that bicyclists have been doing for years, and that's just getting to a whole new slice of the population who before were not getting on a bike. So here they are actually. These are the scooter riders who have gotten to the right spot on the street to ride in. The sidewalk is fairly full of pedestrians, so we've made some space that's sidewalk-like, but also street-like. So yeah, this is actually a picture of our project implemented, and you'll see more in the future in other parts of the presentation. That is a map of what the network looks like. So as I said, we have a street grid. You see a lot of north-south and east-west orange lines. That's about 10 miles of streets, and that's what we were able to do in the 2017-2018 pavement cycle. Another key kind of efficiency that we were able to do with this project is do it when the streets are repaved. So 10 miles of streets coming to be paved, and those were the orange streets. And then what's shown in purple is actually where we have paving scheduled for this year, and so we're coming in with a few more streets this year. And as we keep learning from this project, now people are talking about doing it in other parts of the city.
Quick question.
Yes.
Are those cars parked or driving?
They are parked and driving, but the truck with the man in blue is a parked car. So we have an on-street bikeway, a buffer, a parked row of parked cars, and then one travel lane.
So one lane.
Yeah, and every street is different. There's not a one-size-fits-all solution, but as I get into the engineering, we'll see how this worked well on San Fernando Street. It may work differently on different streets. This is a two-way street. This street has bus service. I'll share some more engineering about that. So for the planning and outreach, this is a graph of what we were trying to both avoid and emulate. This is called the political valley. So we knew that our project would see tepid support during all those community meetings that we were having, going through the middle of 2017 into 2018, and then the project would get built and people would gripe about it, and then we would get through that political valley and we'd start to see people using the project, and then it would actually be more popular than it ever was before. We're actually seeing that that is kind of what happened. We were on the upswing, and it actually wasn't that deep of a valley after all. But how did we do that? We didn't just know that this would happen, because some projects just drop off and then they get taken out. So we had to do everything in the orange bars and in the numbers over there. It shows the mailing, 10,000 mailings, 600 responses on a survey, went door to door to 270 businesses, spoke to 1,500 people, and that's just an aggregate of all the attendance at these 31 meetings. We didn't host 31 meetings because I don't think anyone would be able to do that, so we hosted 7, and the remainder are existing community meetings that we came to the neighborhood association meeting and talked to them there. That was way more effective than having people come to some school gymnasium on their own time. It's like they're already here for the neighborhood group, let's get 15 minutes on their agenda and tell them what we're doing. And that's where they would just say, oh, let's talk about scooters. Another way that we got the word out about this is a pop-up project. We had, for 1 week, we had just a version of it with some trees and cones out in the street. And beyond those 31 neighborhood association meetings, we also knew there were these 14 organizations who will make or break this project. They might require a little more engagement than just, hey, let's tell you what we're doing. Maybe this is something where we actually need to have 3 or 4 meetings where we let them look at the plan set and make notes on it and make some changes to it. I show a picture of the fire truck here because we actually got a very good working relationship going with our fire department, and which culminated in getting to ride along in the fire truck and watching them make turns and how they navigate through the intersections that we were designing. But through that deeper engagement where you work with them in kind of a working session, that's how we got 14 organizations who could just kill the project, essentially go along with it. Here is our political valley. I mentioned it wasn't that deep because on a Friday, everybody parked in both lanes. It was like we had doubled the number of parking spaces downtown. But by Monday, it looked a lot better. Here's the picture by Monday. We've got the green posts in and everybody parked in the right location. Adapt when asked is just sort of a slogan to think about when something unexpected comes up. We've got a homeowner who's really upset about where they're going to put their trash bin. go out there and stand in front of their street and in front of their house and talk to them about their trash bin. You may not always resolve it, but that was a suggestion that he had made, and we made a good faith effort to talk to him about it. Other meetings with bus operators, maybe adjust your design. These are all things that we did, and we did them in a 1 day to 1 week kind of turnaround. As the project was being built, we had to be very adapting. So now I'll transition over to what the design of it looked like. It may not apply, Gina will kind of react to how it applies to some of the streets in this area, but bikeway design is very context-based, so I encourage you to always think, how could we do this, but also what would a creative engineer do to solve this problem? This slide has a lot of text, but when I showed you that grid of streets that didn't come out of nowhere, we wanted to ask people where they thought a better bikeway should go, but we also looked at any number of kind of data sources to also confirm that these are good places for better bikeways to go. This is a design guide from this organization called NACTO, National Association of City Transportation Officials, which sounds really dry and boring, but they're actually really cool. And they wrote the book on how to design for all ages and abilities, and there's a table full of numbers in this design guide that tells you, based on your motor vehicle speed, your number of motor vehicles, and how many lanes are on that street, here's how to choose which bike facility makes sense for that street. Everything from a protected bike lane to no bike lane at all might be considered all ages and abilities based on what the context of the street is. And so we had these numbers, and that led us to picking based on the context, what design we needed to use. And the way that turned out is that we have all these different flavors of bike lanes in different parts of the network. And yet from a user's perspective, it makes sense when we transition from that to that to that, because they're also feeling the context of the street change. Oh, I've entered a residential neighborhood, so now I don't need that protected bike lane anymore. This is how it turned out. We have in the downtown area a lot of purple lines. Those are places where the context said to use a protected bike lane. That's what we've got in the middle of the city. As you move out, we've got some regular bike lanes and some residential streets that are shown in orange there. And it ended up looking like concentric circles without us even explicitly planning for that. Another thing that Rick mentioned is that we are on a continuum doing this project from pop-up to permanent, and by no means do we feel that this is the way to build a high-quality bikeway that's going to get a bunch of people riding like it's the Netherlands tomorrow, but we were able to do it in 1 year, and we were able to do it cheaply. That has pros and cons. The cheaper design, some people don't like it, and some people also don't follow it. So I think of these as being appropriate for a certain time scale. You can do a demonstration for 1 week and maybe a pilot project for 3 months. We're somewhere here, we're doing interim design where we're gonna have it out there for 3 years, but we wanna build this permanent in the long term. This is what you would do for a forever street. And sure enough, one of our streets, by laying it out in an interim fashion, has now received grant funding to go permanent in 3 years' time. We'll have planters and concrete curbs along San Fernando Street. And to give you a sense of cost, I don't know too much about the cost of the first two, but for this interim design bike network, we built 10 miles of streets that were already being paved. That's a huge cost savings. They're already being paved. We did those 10 miles for about $1.5 million. The permanent installation of 1 mile of San Fernando Street will cost about $12 million. So we can't do this everywhere this year. Maybe we can do it in 30 years' time. But we were able to lay out the 10 miles in 1 year. And we have to keep doing that in order to make any kind of dent in the number of miles of streets that San Jose has. Getting really into engineering details here, how did we do it considering all those different contexts and all the different things that the design guide encouraged us to do? We had an engineer working on the project who came from a firm called Crossroad Lab, and he's an independent consultant who came up with the idea of let's have a bunch of individual pieces, and they're kind of like Legos. You could mix and match them and put them on the street wherever that makes sense in that context. And these details, when combined, turn into a bike network. So I just wanted to kind of show you, this is what your city workers are looking at when they're making street design. And all these combined together look like something like this. So you can see we've got pretty complex intersections going on, but since they're all based on the same details, when a user sees green bars, the user knows this means I'm supposed to go this direction, or I'm on a bikeway now, or I'm driving across a bikeway right now. You'll see in this photo another kind of innovation that we did in this design is actually putting in these things called protected intersections. So everybody knows the experience of riding a bike up to an intersection, and that's the point where somebody merges into the bike lane to make a right turn. We're treating those right turns a little bit differently, and it's kind of hard to describe unless you just come to San Jose and use it, but I'll show you a picture of that. This was the intersection of 4th and San Fernando Street a year ago, and this is it today. And these turn pockets are on the corner. And so when you are coming through this intersection, you're almost treating it like a roundabout. You don't make a left turn as a bike in a traditional sense. Instead, you come to the turn and you go from corner to corner until you're heading in the direction you want to go in. One key takeaway from this photo here is just looking at the distance from bollard to bollard is a lot shorter than what the crosswalk distance was in the other photo. So we've essentially narrowed quite a bit the amount of time that pedestrians are exposed to traffic. When you're actually crossing a travel lane is only about half of the entire street width. The rest of the time you're walking through some kind of painted off space or walking through a bicycle turn area. What we've seen from users using these intersections is that the speeds have gone way lower and people are treating them really carefully. And then the pedestrians are so happy with this new arrangement that they're actually standing out in the street because now it feels like a place where they can be. Again, to see it in action, it's really good to just visit San Jose. I think I have one more picture. Here it is in action. These are the pedestrians who might even make it out into the street. And in the future, we plan to turn this area into a pedestrian waiting area. But I don't think he would have stood on the curb like that if someone was going to whip around that corner making a right turn. So the pedestrian and the bicyclist have this sort of safe refuge on the corner. So some of the other challenges we were looking at, as I mentioned before, San Fernando Street is a street that has bus service. And for years, the buses and the bikes would do this dance where they'd leapfrog each other and they would both slow each other down. And that was not a comfortable arrangement. It created a lot of friction and it actually had negative impacts on both travel times. When you put in these protected bike lanes, and if you expect the bus to just pull into the bike lane and you peel back some of that protection at the bus stop, you've actually made things a lot worse. Now the bus can't really get in there anymore, and the bicyclists are kind of stopped by the bus and can't really get around them. This bus is even hanging out into the travel lane. So in all ways, this arrangement really doesn't work. And so don't ignore the bus service on the street. If you're going to do a protected bike lane, you're also going to need to find a new arrangement for this. And what we are working with is putting in bus islands. So this is a bus platform. Now the bus has pulled right up next to it. It's not hanging anymore. This is where the bike would cross behind the bus island. And this crosswalk right here is where a bus passenger would walk across the bike lane and wait for the bus on the island. You'll notice that this looks a little different from anything made of concrete. We were working quickly and we wanted to use quick build materials, and so this bus platform is actually made of giant Legos. It's stuck onto the street. It's removable and adjustable, but it's not that removable. It's actually fairly permanent. This is a good point to talk a little bit about how big of an effort this was for our city department. We have a department staff of about 450 folks. We're a department of transportation that does a lot of things like clean out storm sewers and manage street trees. But if you imagine, of that staff of 450, we did a quick tally. Over 100 city employees touched this project. Everyone from engineers to maintenance, our senior staff. And all those 100 people have a new skill that they learned that is a skill that is in service of building bike lanes. So if the future is a lot more bike lanes and a lot more jobs building bike lanes, we've just trained 100 people to now look for this stuff and be able to build it, maybe get one of those jobs that we're talking about. This bus platform was not easy to build, and there's actually a piece of asphalt underneath that's holding it up and leveled the street a little bit. I worked a lot with those asphalt installation crews to figure out a way to make this platform work. This is actually a really good photo of dumpsters behaving themselves. They are in the right place, and we even have a row of bumps so that they don't roll over into the bike lane. But this is not often the case in downtown. We're still struggling with how to communicate where the dumpsters should go, and working with the haulers and the neighboring buildings to set up this new arrangement. Sometimes when I think about this, we're getting a lot of new complaints around the city. We're getting people who say, the dumpsters were in the bike lane again this morning, or UPS has pulled into the bike lane. And we maybe didn't hear those things before when the bike lane was out there, but they were still happening. People were dropping off and picking up in the bike lane. People left their dumpsters in the bike lane. So our new arrangement has just made visible what used to be invisible, which is that these are things that people deal with every day. We are working through it. We want to come up with a solution like this for every location, but it really is location by location, and you have to do a lot of checking in and going back. When this project gets to its next phase, where there's a piece of concrete along there, we'll probably have a lot more success at keeping out a UPS truck or a dumpster. Okay, so, and then lastly, I just wanted to quickly summarize that a lot of folks talk about data and how you make your case for your projects. And data wasn't the overarching reason for doing our project, but we have a lot of people interested in it, so I wanted to talk a little bit about how we plan to evaluate it. We have, every April, we have some locations in downtown where we're just gonna do a 2-hour count of how many bicyclists and scooters are coming by and where they're riding. That's just, it's data collection, but it takes a lot of volunteers and it's manual. So that's one way we're going to look at it. There's other transportation data that we have collected often when we do any kind of survey of speeds on a street or traffic volumes to find out if a new development is going to generate new traffic or something like that. Those are all data sources that we'll look at before and after for better bikeways. And then this was one result of just an online survey that we had done before the project that said, what are the messages that are going to really move you to support something like this? And for almost every demographic and every user, safety is the most important message. So we learned from that if you show a photo of a protected bike lane, you want people to see that and say, wow, that looks safe. So that is much more moving the needle than any message about sort of environmentalism. Just putting it out there. Except for the car commuters, they do like the message about environmentalism. And then last kind of data point that we're going to be looking at is more than just here's 6 bicyclists instead of 3. We want to talk a little more qualitatively about how this project has affected people's lives. And so we have 2 graduate students who are at San Jose State, and they're working on master's theses and PhD dissertations that are interviewing users of the street and saying, has this changed your behavior? Are you now interested in biking to the downtown train station in the past you drove? Or have you been able to bring your family to their elementary school on one of these streets? So that's another way we're going to evaluate it, is just having the stories out there, having people whose lives have changed because of it. And last slide is, I just talked about doing one project in about 1.5 years' time, but as any city does on kind of a cyclical basis, we have to update our bikeway plan. It only goes till 2020 now, and we're going to go 5 years further to 2025. And on the draft network, almost every major thoroughfare is scheduled to have a protected bike lane. That's not something that is feasible unless we're using some of these quick build techniques. And so if this is our draft network for the next 5 years, we're going to have to see a lot more of this, but also we've had people coming to our meetings saying they want to see more of this, especially outside of downtown. So just a plug for the bike plan, that we're updating it now, and the final draft hasn't been adopted yet. And so that's the end of my presentation. I know I'm interested to hear from Gina if there are ways that this is applicable to the Santa Cruz County context, and then also field questions of what that experience was like and how to design these.